On this edition of Thinking Biblically, Avner Boskey from Israel is back to give us an update in light of the recent Iranian attack. Welcome to Thinking Biblically. My name is Alan Gilman. Thinking Biblically is a podcast dedicated to exploring how all of Scripture speaks to all of life. Well, I just finished another update interview with my friend Avner Boskey from Beersheba, Israel. As you listen to it, and watch it, listen to it, listen very carefully, because I try to push Avner, help us to understand what's going on, and it's for him who has ears to hear to really get the intricacies and the complexities of the current situation. And also, I encourage you to stick with the interview to the end to hear where we land, because where we land is of utmost importance. I first met Avner in the late 1970s in Montreal, Canada, where we're both from. Sometime later, he and his wife Rachel emigrated to Israel, eventually settling in Beersheba. Avner is a teacher, writer, and musician who provides a biblically based and insightful view of God's heart for Israel and the Middle East. He's written several books, including Jews, Arabs in the Middle East, A Messianic Perspective, a book I highly recommend as a primer to help you understand the complex dynamics of the current conflict. Avner, thank you for being here again.
It's wonderful to be with you, hands across the water.
And land.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, about as much land as water, I imagine. But if you're far away, and it's wonderful that we could do this, looking forward to the next time we could see each other in person, which would be wonderful. So we're recording this. It's Tuesday morning, my time, April the 16th. It's day 193 of the war with Hamas. The last time you were here, it was day 58. Before we discuss the Iranian assault from the other day, I remember many saying that the events of October 7 were not going to be resolved quickly. But did you think we would be where we are now 6 months later?
There's two ways to answer that question. The first one is by quoting a guy who used to be head of military intelligence, and he was chief of staff and the minister of defense. His name was Bogi Ya'alon. And he talked about meeting soldiers, the parents of soldiers. So he would meet parents of soldiers who were in the army, and the parents would come and meet him and ask him questions. It's not something you do in Canada or in America, but Israel's smaller. So a woman came up to him and said, if what you're saying, that there's going to be 100 years of war between us and our neighbors, what kind of hopeful message is that? And he said, I'm glad you got the message, because that's the situation. So we're not only talking about 170 or 190 days, we're talking about 100 years actually of fighting going on in the Middle East, which is connected with the Jewish people returning to their land. Now, it's amazing how God is so dense that he doesn't understand, but bringing the Jewish people back to their land is going to have ramifications. And of course, that's what Ezekiel 36 through 39 and Ezekiel 25 talk about. And so, I'm not surprised. We're dealing with people like Osama bin Laden, and they don't, frankly.
Is he still around? I thought he's gone. Oh, you said people like Osama. Okay.
Not that I like him, but like him.
Yeah.
They don't really care too much about the people whom they capture as captives. They're expendable. They're dead meat. And that's where we are right now.
So it's really tragic, but it's helpful. But there's been one kind of confusing thing, this whole thing, and you're there in Israel. You were at home on October 7th when the Hamas pogrom happened right in your neighborhood. The impression I have coming out of Israel is it was actually a surprise in that, oh, we're used to living this way. We're used to dealing with rockets falling on us. We go to our safe rooms and the Iron Dome stops us. We could build kibbutzim right on the border of Gaza and reach out to the poor Gazans and take them to hospitals, and we're okay with this. In fact, even hearing the play up, because Iran announces they're going to be doing this thing, and I believe it was Israeli defense minister basically was saying, "Don't worry, folks, we've got this," and we'll get to the details of what happened the other night. But there seems to be this attitude of, yes, we live in a very dangerous neighborhood, but we know how to handle it, except for October 7th. That went really, really bad, and we're still dealing with that. But by and large, not only the normal stuff, but the Iranian onslaught. Yeah, we got this. So how do you respond to that kind of, am I right that there is that sort of attitude?
I had a teacher once at the seminary, Don Glenn. He helped translate the NIV for Proverbs and Jeremiah and Ecclesiastes. And he talked about using the original languages, in this case Hebrew, and he's talked about how some people try to, push the limits on it. And he talked about slicing the bologna so thin that there is only one side. And so, here it's really hard that there should only be one side. For instance, on Saturday, Rachel and I had to go up on Friday, sorry, we had to go up to get a big toy for our grandson's third birthday. And coming back through Tel Aviv, we wanted to see what's going on. Thousands of people on the beach. So in that sense, that's one side of the baloney. And the other side of the baloney is many of the supermarkets were cleaned out by people who were afraid that there would be a major war and there wouldn't be enough food or water. So both happen simultaneously. And what happens often with news is they choose which narrative they want to go to, and then they just push that one. So the answer is yes and no.
So let's be a little fair to the media just for a second, if we may, and they could, write me and thank me for this. But that only seeing one side of the baloney, it seems to me that's not just a media thing, but the people on the beach really did see it one way, and the people buying up the stuff in the supermarket really did see it the other way. Is that not the case? That they're actually
maybe they're the same people. They say with two Jews there are three opinions.
Well, okay. Well, how? So when you if you talk to your neighbors, what do you get? The sense of a complex understanding. I like one of the. I love bringing up COVID because I thought it was such a terrible thing and there was so much confusion, and I think we should learn lessons from it. But my experience with COVID, which is, I'm not comparing the COVID crisis to what's going on in Israel and the world right now, but the way people relate to these things I find similar, and in that people want resolve. People want somebody to say, I know this is confusing. This is what's happening. That's one of the reasons why we pick sides in the media, because even if it makes us angry, it seems to calm down this other part of us, because we can't live with confusion and unresolved. So do you find? Because I find most people aren't nuanced. They're not nuanced in their understanding. They don't talk about the politics as well. It's like this, and it could be like that. It may be this. People don't like that. They want to go, this is the side I'm on. What do you think?
Well, I think there's some truth to what you're saying. I'm making a different point. And my point is, for the most part, doesn't matter where you're coming from, most media is very jejune, very surface. They don't do their homework. And it's not like media that we knew maybe 50, 60 years ago. And as a result, one cannot always know what's going on by looking at the media, because to a large extent, it's kind of like Oceania, Eurasia, and what was the name of the third country? the three countries of George Orwell in 1984. They're always at war, and as things move and change a little bit, you have to kind of tweak the news to make it fit. And if you
So,
ask me more questions about what went on over this past weekend, I think you'll find some very interesting things.
okay. So why don't we go to that then? For those that, if by chance people don't know the details of what happened, could you first describe that and then you can comment away? So what happened the other night?
Sure. The general understanding would be across the board in the media and across the board in Israel would be that on April 1st, the man who was a general, Iranian general, who was the mastermind of the slaughter on October 7th, was in Damascus in a building across the street from the Iranian embassy. He was meeting with 6, 7 other terror masterminds. And an air attack, assumed to be Israel, although Israel didn't say, took him out. And 2 days later, in the Iranian media, they basically said he was the man who was in charge of planning October 7th. So is there a good motive here? I mean, a likely motive as far as what Israel is concerned, assuming that Israel did that? 100%. This is a man who is a planner of the biggest mass murder since the Holocaust. And but Iran said, no, 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 now we have a justifiable reason to attack Israel. Well, they had a justifiable reason to attack Israel before then, because according to their perspective, from a jihadi classical Islam perspective, any land conquered by Islam cannot be taken by the kufr, the heretics, including the Jews, and must be liberated through jihad. So from their perspective, justifiable. From Israel's perspective, to quote Bob Dylan, we're not prepared to lay down and die when our door is kicked in. Our perspective is even more eminently justifiable. And so what happened is Iran began to plan to do an attack. Now, what happened after that is fascinating, and we could talk about that after what you're asking, but you're asking specifically. Saturday night, there were something like 350 missiles, rockets, and drones, which were headed our way. Many of the rockets, 50% of them blew up on the way, but many of them came, and 50% of them were directed at air bases and army bases. But they exploded all over the place. We had probably 20 minutes of nonstop sirens, which we never had before. There was a time to put together a consortium of air forces, mostly Israeli and American, but also some British, a smattering of maybe some Jordanians, and some Saudi intelligence, which was passed on. And through the combination of planes shooting down slow-moving drones and Arrow 3 anti-missiles, Israeli, and American pilots and Israeli pilots, 99% of the incoming ordnance was destroyed. Probably something like 9 missiles fell in the Negev area, not far from us. 4 actually near an airbase, and a few more up in the north. Couple of them, and there's various possibilities. Not everything is being talked about, but it could be one came near the Nuclear Research Center, but definitely an act of war. So between 10 o'clock at night and 3 in the morning here in Israel, there was a sense of we don't know what's going to be happening, and there were a lot of bombs, a lot of rockets being shot down. No one was killed. There was a 7-year-old Bedouin girl, Amina, who a piece of an anti-aircraft rocket fell and hit her on the head, and she was kind of badly injured. But apart from that, no one was injured. So then the discussion then is, what does it mean? What happened, and why did it happen? And that's what we could get into if you want to go
Yeah,
there.
I do. Before you get there, so there were several projectiles that did land. Um, is that the fact? Do you think the defense forces allowed those to fall because they weren't
No.
going to? Okay, so then does it lean more towards the 99%? Uh, not to in any way downplay the success of the defense forces, but is it a miracle that there was such little injury and damage?
Well, it all depends what's going on. So I think there's some background going on here, which is not so much being covered by most of the media, but it is beginning to be covered. Probably there's a good 5 or 6 main articles out here and there. And it has to do with how superpowers play the great game. For instance, in 2020, January, February in Iraq, America took out a very famous terrorist. His name was Qasem Soleimani. And he was one up higher than the one Israel took out, if Israel did that. And Iran got in touch with America and said, we have to respond. We're going to attack your bases in Iraq because we actually control a lot of Iraq. And they made an agreement about when the attack would happen and what would be hit and what wouldn't be hit. And it turns out that no blood was shed in the Iranian attack through Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq. Some people got brain injuries, trauma from the rocket attacks. President Trump mentioned what happened and talked about it. Sometimes he talks too much, but he talked about it, and the Iranians talked about it, and it involved basically consulting on how to do an attack which would be good for Iranian pride and public consumption in the country without causing a full world war. And that's what happened. Much the same thing seems to have happened here, with Iran speaking both to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has admitted this and talked about it. It's on the internet. Going through Oman and Switzerland and saying, okay, we are going to respond to Israel. So with consultation with America, America said, go ahead, just don't do too many civilian casualties. Same thing exactly as what happened in Iraq in 2020. And so I think part of what we have had is a highly orchestrated campaign with certain political goals in mind. Having said that, that doesn't change the essential foundational pillars of what's going on here, which is that Iran hates us, is developing nuclear weapons to destroy us, and were the masterminds behind October 7th, behind Hezbollah, behind the Houthis, behind the Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, behind Syria. So they say even paranoid people can have real enemies, and we do have real enemies. But I think that things ended up, it's kind of like President Ronald Reagan's Star Wars, if you remember his plan. This was his dream, kind of, with these incredible space-age weapons, we become invincible. I'm very thankful that these things were blown up. If you see the size of some of these rockets as they fell in Iraq or in Syria or the Dead Sea. They're very big. One of them could ruin your whole day. And so, yeah, they wanted to kill us too. That would be just collateral damage. But they did want to take out the nuclear reactor, and they did want to take out an F-35 base for sure. The amazing thing here is the same dynamic that America was willing to negotiate with Iran back in 2020, and now America is negotiating with Iran about our deterrence as Israel. I've just been studying a book from 1991 written by Moshe Ahrens, who was the defense minister. It's called Broken Covenant. He goes into detail of all the personal meetings with his extensive notes of what happened in the first Gulf War. The same type of thing happened. Israel was told, stay out of it. And even if you're hit, stay out of it and don't respond. Maximum restraint. And we were hit. And we didn't respond. And America didn't do what it promised on a host of things for us. I'm not only saying that as a Canadian.
I remember that day like yesterday, and I won't get into all the reasons why, except my mother calling on the phone and saying that Saddam had hit Tel Aviv, and they believed that it was chemical. And we didn't watch a lot of, we still don't watch TV news. But anyway, so we're watching what's going on, and I remember the commentators on some Canadian media outlet saying that as we speak, planes are going from Israel now heading towards Iraq. And then the story was that they got called back. Now, of course, only,
they were never sent. They were never sent.
You think they weren't sent at all?
Never sent. Never sent. But this is what I'm talking about. Sometimes they say in Yiddish that a specialist is someone 50 kilometers away from home.
Yeah.
And Iraq is a long way away from some media outlets in North America. Yeah, no, there were never planes sent.
But so the thing is, so it on one hand, it's easy to believe that a lot of this stuff is orchestrated and planned, and there's these strange kind of negotiations through third parties, like you were explaining. And I remember from our vantage point on Saturday evening, watching the text messages. I found a group on Telegram and WhatsApp that gets up to the moment, as it's happening, reports, and you don't know what to trust. But still, we all heard about the drones are on their way, and it takes 9 hours for the drones to come. And it's like, first of all,
7 to 9 hours.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, that shouldn't be difficult to deal with. Now, later on, I'm learning, too, that the ballistic missiles and other things can take 15 minutes to come. And even then, Israeli defense is saying, well, we can handle 15 minutes. That's plenty of time for us. But this was no surprise attack. We were hearing about it for days. And then even when it's coming, it's like, here it comes, everybody. Unlike what happened on October 7th. But then so on one hand, you're saying that the Iranians, through intermediaries, are talking to the Americans are allowing this and not allowing that, whatever it is. But then at the same time, they're trying to hit the military bases and hit the nuclear site. So on one hand, it's like there's a leash on them. On the other hand, there's not a leash on them. So what is it? What is this game? Like, if you open the box and read the rules, what's the rules of this game?
Sure. For those who want simplistic, fast answers, you go to Tim Hortons or McDonald's. But in the real world, you're dealing with stuff which is a little more complicated. There's a very good book. It was a classic of spy books called The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, written by John le Carré. And it talks about a whole setup of trying to do certain things which involved lying. Remember, spies lie for a living, and they try to get other people to betray their country. And that's how we have security, right? For believers, this is, of course, a big question here. What can you do like that? But of course, Joshua and Rahab also lied, and they're considered people in the household of faith. But that's a different question. The fact of the matter is, Canada said none is too many. Okay, did that represent every Canadian? Of course not. Did it represent the ones who had the power? Of course it did. So we have to deal with the fact that there's
And
a
it had very practical effects for people who couldn't get into Canada and died.
That's right. That's right. So this room full of mirrors is part of diplomacy and intelligence and big business. That's the way it is. And so we're just seeing it again. If you look at how Rockefeller in World War II circumvented the American embargo on Germany by selling oil from Standard Oil through Spain, and Spain would give it then to Germany. There's hundreds of examples of that when people talk about the banking industry in Switzerland and how that all worked. 100 examples of that. This is another one, but you're not going to hear that just yet. But again, open source. You just hit these words in Google and you go to the articles. I'm writing a newsletter. I've been writing it for 4 days. I had to totally switch direction as more information came out. I had to validate if that information is true. So yeah, when that comes out, anyone who wants to can go to our website at davidstent.org and read our newsletter.
And I'll make sure the link is there so people can access that. And I highly recommend your newsletter, as I've done many times. So I want, did you explain what the Iranian assault really was? Because it still sounds a little confusing to me. It's like, I don't know. I'm not a fly fisherman, but the idea is, you let it go out a little bit, you reel it in a little bit, you let it go out a little bit, and you're trying to fool the fish. And between the Americans, the Iranians, the Israelis, the Saudis, the Jordanians, like what in the world is really going on?
Sure. There's a wonderful line in the movie Schindler's List when everybody's in the ghetto of Plaszow beside Krakow, and they're standing around a barrel, an oil barrel with pieces of wood in it, and they're burning the wood to keep warm. And one of them says, this is as bad as it gets. It's not going to get worse than this. And that's the axis in the movie. Because right at that point, then the Nazis come in and start taking all the people from Plaszow to Auschwitz in the Aktion. And so what we have here is this is not as bad as it gets. What we have here is a very simple campaign. Israel is happy. We've done, America are saying, well, no, we shut down more jets than Israel. Jordan says, yeah, we helped America, but if the jets came from Israel, we'd shoot them down. Saudi Arabia says, yes, we helped Israel, but that's just because we don't like what Iran is. Everybody has their take on what's going on. The fact is the Iranians committed a pretty severe act of war against us, even if it was pulling their punches. But if anyone concludes that this is all Iran can do, they can do a lot more than this. They barely did anything. They didn't mostly go after population centers. Okay, they didn't send their super fast missiles. They sent 36 of them. So there's an issue here of, yes, they hate us, yes, they want to destroy us, but they are also playing the West, as they have during Obama's day when they got all the money. Even Biden, who's given them $10 billion of loan, of a transfer of sanctions of money, etc., and they're preparing. Remember, the Iranians have a reputation in the Middle East of being the best businessmen and wheeler dealers of any people. And they have huge patience. And to me, this is basically a stealth operation to get the West to go to sleep. And, if people believe that this is all they can do, they're very wrong. By the way, there's a program, Fauda, which is probably known in America a lot, about Israeli undercover counterintelligence team. You can get it on Netflix and stuff, FAUDA. That's pretty heavy stuff, but it's fairly accurate. But another one came out called Tehran, which is also available on Netflix. And Tehran deals with, again, Israeli Mossad in Tehran, trying to take out the nuclear facilities and what's involved with that. And one of the main issues in the plot is, again, of Iran fooling people in order to achieve what they're doing. This is war. Some say the famous Chinese war philosopher talks about fooling people. He also says about hostages, he says, you find out what hurts the enemy most and you do that. And this is why Hamas is doing what they're doing, because they know how much Israel cares about the hostages. From what I understand, very few of the hostages are alive right now. This is something very, very sad. But the mercies of Hamas are not very, very kind. So yeah, we have but again, we have a situation like Hitler, but worse. Jihad, but worse. And this
So
is
what makes
in
it
the
worse?
modern culture. Well, we have greater powers. We have the ability in 1 second to broadcast the whole what's happened in a battle in 20 minutes on your screen. And so, on one hand, people can find out things that it took years to find out. On the other hand, disinformation can go just as fast. And governments, believe it or not, like propaganda. Politicians like propaganda. It's how they get elected. If people knew the truth of everything, no one would get elected. People would be praying for the return of Yeshua so he could set up the Messianic kingdom and we would have honest politicians. But yeah, that's where we are. So we know a lot and we know nothing. The human heart hasn't changed. Israel still has enemies. And the one thing I try to tell people is Ezekiel 38 says Persia or Iran is still going to be around at the battle of Gog and Magog. So I don't think we're wiping them out either.
Before we earlier today, I sent you a link to an article describing yesterday's worldwide blockade. How much are the tentacles of this, do you think? I know your specialty is more in the land of Israel, but I think how much does the world need to wake up that there's the tentacles of this thing seem to be reaching globally? Can you comment on that?
That organization, sure. That organization specifically is probably more to get headlines than actually to achieve anything. They're based on basically a bunch of rather young, woke people who are buying into a communist revolutionary agenda without knowing what communism and revolution is. They don't know what's going on in the Middle East. They're also specialists 50 miles away from home. And but what's so interesting, if people know history, and most people don't, this reminds me very much of what the Nazis were doing in the 30s against the Jews in Germany, and this concept of blockade and embargo. So these are spiritually the sons and daughters of the Nazis. And what's happening is they are really trying to cause damage. They're not smart enough to do a huge amount of damage, but they're trying. Maybe in time they'll learn, God forbid.
So if you had the opportunity right now and I was able to transport you into a fellowship of believers in Canada, the United States, and you get to the point of what can we do, how can we pray, what do you wish people would, how do I say that? How would you like people to respond?
I always go to the three-legged stool, and I would probably make it a five-legged stool. The first leg is it says that we're supposed to be praying for the Jewish people, Isaiah 62, that all the prophetic promises be fulfilled. Now, if a believer doesn't think that the Bible has prophetic promises to Israel, then one has to go back to ground zero and say, okay, what does the Bible teach? But the first thing is to pray for Israel, for the promises to be fulfilled. The second thing, I think, is Romans 1:16, which is to share the gospel with the Jewish people. It's their Messiah. And sometimes Gentiles make it like a secret. We don't want to tell the Jews. Maybe they'll take their Messiah back. So I think evangelism, Romans 1:16, it says it's a priority. I think the third thing, as you can see this developing in Canada, anti-Semitism is growing. And it's going to be a time when people are going to have to be like Corrie ten Boom and stand with to protect the Jewish people. So that's something very important, those three things. And I would add two things apart from that, which is one, the amount of misinformation and disinformation coming through all the media. I'm not against media. I love media. I'm talking to you on media. I've spent my life giving interviews to people. But I think that the amount of actual harmful propaganda coming out is everywhere. And just like I remember when I went to seminary and they were giving English tests to the people coming into seminary, I said, English tests? What is this? And they said, it's America. So I'm from Canada. I knew how to speak English. But in America, they needed to have English tests to get into a higher education institute. People don't know how to think. They don't know how to weigh. And they basically keep one nation on and they don't look around to see, are there any other perspectives in the world? Can we hear something from Israel? Maybe even hear something from Iran. That might be a challenge for some of us. But could we get perspectives to hear what's being said? Not all of Israel say the same thing. Most of the people in Israel tend to be kind of New Democratic Party or west of that. And so if you want to hear other opinions, you got to go to sources. So to get informed. And fifth, I think people need to read the Bible for all it's worth, because most people don't know that the Bible, 95% written by Jews, 95% written about Jews, has a lot to say about the end of days, and most people don't know nothing about it. So these are some good things to do.
You commented on the hesitation of believers to share our own Messiah with us. I know that isn't the topic at hand, but it's certainly a great concern of mine, as it is of yours, and we believe of God's himself. Do you know why that hesitation exists? Why people don't want to talk to us about our own Messiah?
Sure, there's probably three reasons. The first one is Satan hates the gospel and he doesn't want the Jews to get saved. The second thing, I think, is that there's a terrible history of Christianity toward the Jews. Some of the greatest anti-Semitism has come through the church, and any believer who's aware of that is mortified by that and doesn't know how to deal with that. I think the third reason is because people think all Jews know what they're talking about. Like they're all specialists in Hebrew and in Bible and in rabbinics. Most Jews don't. You know, even most Jews in Israel who speak Hebrew don't know these things. Most Messianic believers in the world don't know very much about the calling of God. Most Christian Gentiles don't know very much about the calling of God on the Jewish people. So yeah, I think there's a fear of being rejected. And that could be that, you know, they say don't wash people's feet with boiling water. So one can communicate the gospel with humility and with sensitivity. And there's ways to do that. But the question is one weeping over the spiritual the state of the Jewish people?
Do you think some Christians hesitate to share the gospel with Jewish people because they think it's not our time and God's going to do it later, so why bother?
Yeah, this would be like the two men who fall down the stairs. The first one's a Calvinist, the second one's an Arminian. When the Calvinist falls down the stairs, he says, "Thank God that's over." The Arminian says, "I think I'll be more careful next time." So the question is, does one use the sovereignty of God to avoid the commandments of God? I think that would be a false usage of the Bible.
Okay. Any final words before we go?
Peace, love, and good fellowship. Don't use too much incense. Don't listen to rock music too loud. No. Pray for us in Israel. We need your prayers.
And to get more commentary by Avner, as well as relevant prayer requests, we do urge you to sign up for his newsletter. And you can contact him at davidstent.org. The link will be in the description. Avner, as always, thank you so much for taking this time to talk with me. I so appreciated where my time with Avner ended up, because it's so easy to get caught up with all the geopolitics, and I think all that's important, and we should be engaged, and we should be praying in light of what's going on the best as we can understand what is going on, because obviously, tracking with what Avner was saying, it's not that easy to really know, except God knows, and we know we need to pray. And please be praying not only for the physical well-being of our people, the Jewish people, be it in Israel or here in Canada and elsewhere, but that we would come to know our Messiah as we were designed to. So please remember us in prayer. And as we approach the Passover season, Passover begins next Monday evening, that as we gather all over the world, remembering how God released us from oppression in the land of Egypt, that we and all people of all nations would come to experience the freedom of the great oppression from sin and from death and from the power of the evil one through the power of God's Messiah, Yeshua. One day, according to Zechariah, our people are going to come to a place of great humility and be able to recognize our Messiah for who he is. And that's happening. I heard recently that from Joel Rosenberg from All Israel News, he claims that there are more Jewish believers today than ever before. And I kind of knew that, but his numbers are even higher. We know that there's been a lot of soul searching and spiritual interest on behalf of our people in light of the troubles of these days. May God use that to bring us to himself. But in those of you that are not Jewish, that have a heart to pray for our people, for our physical, for our spiritual welfare, you're praying that we would come to a place of humility and be able to recognize our Messiah for who he is, even though he's been so misrepresented to us by the church for 2,000 years. In order to pray effectively for us to come to a place of humility, you need to be in that place of humility. That you don't pray like down upon people. We need to lift people up. And I encourage all of us to allow God to work his miracle of humility in our hearts so that we could see him for who he really is, as we see ourselves for who we really are, so we can look at other people for who they are and what God wants them to be. Too often, people of various religious groups, including the church, they say, there's this thing, God loves you, has a wonderful plan for your life, when actually, we say God loves you and we have a wonderful plan for your life. Well, we need to pray that God's will is done in other people's lives and hearts, not our will. And we don't realize how often we're praying for our own will to be done in our own lives, and we need God to bring us to that place of humility. I hope that's making sense. Please feel free to respond in the comments through email. You can contact me at comments@thinkingbiblically.org. If you haven't already subscribed to this YouTube channel or this podcast on your podcast provider, please do so. That really helps, and review and share and so on. And if you want to contact Avner, as we already said, you can reach him via his website at David's Tent. It's one word, davidstent.org. And so until next time, this is Alan Gilman with Thinking Biblically.